Salut tout le monde, aujourd'hui je reçois Nick de Fuel. How are you, Nick?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, very good. I'm very happy to have you. Fuel just launched. No, when was the mainnet of Fuel?
Mainnet was not too long ago, so I think December 19th was when we launched. Yeah.
That's the perfect time. Okay, can you tell us a bit about yourself? What have you done in the past and what brings you to bring Fuel?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been building in Ethereum and blockchain space for quite a long time. I started in 2013. Initially, I was doing like a lot of mining, that sort of stuff. I started to build. I started to get pretty disenfranchised with some of the Bitcoin stuff, so I found Ethereum. Then after Ethereum, started to build things there. Tried Consensus, worked there for many years doing apps and infrastructure, that kind of thing. And then left Consensus and wanted to basically tackle some of these kind of core challenges that Ethereum has with scalability and throughput. And so started Fuel in around 2019, and from that point, been working on Fuel ever since. That's a bit of background about myself.
2019, you said?
Yeah, so 2019 was when we very first started. Yeah, we launched actually the first actual roll up to Ethereum that hit stage 2, which is what we call Fuel V1. In December 2020, so pretty early. Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. And how would you describe Fuel in very simple words? We can go in technical detail after, but right now.
Yeah. I mean, in simple words, I would say that Fuel is a scalability layer for Ethereum and for any blockchain, such that blockchains have a lot of issues, and human beings, when they interact with them in large numbers, seem to either break them or not have a good experience with them. So Fuel is really meant to fix those issues really wholeheartedly, both for Ethereum, for any blockchain, and kind of act as a technology to alleviate these issues, such that human beings can actually use blockchains and use them in everyday life and be able to not suffer how most of us have suffered for many years, the poor experience of using most blockchains.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's the first one I know of, actually, that use UTXO model.
Yeah, so I mean, the UTXO models used here and there, like obviously for Bitcoin, some layer ones, UTXOs are more popular. I know that Aztec does use a UTXO model as well, so it's not to say we're the only ones in Ethereum that use it. But yeah, UTXOs are really, once you get the hang of them, they're such an incredible primitive that it's kind of sad that the account model from Ethereum became more prevalent, because I think UTXOs are way more powerful.
Okay, and for people that doesn't know what is account model and UTXO, can you simply explain what it is?
Yeah, so when you think about these blockchains, they act as sort of ledgers of account, you could say. So this person transfers X to Y, et cetera, et cetera. And you can think of blockchains as either a giant list of accounts where you just have everyone's account and then you have how much they have of whatever token, or you can do it a little differently. And you can say, instead of having a giant list of accounts, you have what is effectively a giant list of coins that are assigned to different accounts. And so when you have that, it sort of is like when you send coins, they're kind of sent in this little package, you could say, and that package is assigned to a certain owner. And when you do things that way, it's more closer to how the real world works. I think that, if you look at like cash, for example, if I give you cash, it's not like there's some giant list out there that keeps all the cash of everyone on planet Earth in a giant database somewhere. It's more that I sent you something, or I gave you something, and now you have it legally or whatever. And so in terms of physics, I think it's a nicer model, just because, it can work better in parallel, and we don't need to go to this necessary central accounting system all the time to ensure that it works. So I think UTXOs are really nice in terms of just the way that they work, basically. I think it's more natural. Yeah.
Okay. And you use so Fuel VM with Sway language. Yeah, I think that's the first already. What does it look like, and is it a struggle to find some builders with this new language?
Yeah. So basically, Fuel is sort of an odd project, you could say, in the sense that we basically do everything for the reasons of trying to do the best engineering we can, and we sort of ignore trying to copy other people all the time. So basically, when it comes to our virtual machine or our language, Fuel itself has its own virtual machine, its own system for doing smart contracts. And the Fuel VM and Sway, I would say, they're different in a number of ways. With the Fuel VM specifically, we kind of looked at all the available architectures, whether it be Move, whether it be Risk, whether it be Solana, whether it be the EVM, and designed something from more first principles that actually incorporated, I think, all of the knowledge we have up to date up until, say, 2024. So, really trying to incorporate as much of the design lessons and, the failings and the positives to give developers sort of the absolute best possible blockchain virtual machine that can exist. So the Fuel VM really incorporates all these different design principles into a single system. And to target this machine, we've kind of learned over time that if you've ever built on systems that use Rust and smart contracts, it's pretty awful and pretty bad. Solidity as well is not necessarily the most powerful language or the best. It's certainly the one that's most adopted. So we wanted a language that kind of brought the lessons of Solidity and Rust into a single language to be able to target our machine. So in a sense, the goal with Fuel is always to build the best possible thing we can do. So in this case, we really tried to aim for building the best possible virtual machine and the best possible language to target that virtual machine. So really, I'd say that's the way to think about it.
So it's quite easy for someone that don't know Sway to learn it if he know Rust or Solidity.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean it'll be so familiar and so fast that it's not really an issue. I think the bigger barrier to entry for most projects is, why would you build on a new technology? It's not really adopted very much yet, or things like that. And I think in that sense, that's sort of a question that we'll need to make sure we answer for every developer. But I would say the major reason is because, really when we're talking about our plans for what we want to do with Fuel and what we want to do with the internet, I don't think many people understand sort of the scope or the breadth of the project yet, or what we are capable of. So I think that in a sense, there's still going to be a lot of work to get people to sort of understand how everything works and why we did the designs we did. But it will definitely pay dividends for projects that start early with it.
Okay, awesome. So what's the North Star of Fuel? What's your focus? Yeah,
I would say the North Star, and we're going to do another live stream this week as well to kind of explain some of this. Okay. But the North Star is really that there's kind of three kinds of blockchain you can build right now. You can do a layer 1, you can do sort of a layer 2, right, where you maybe pick different DA layers and do different things. And then you have kind of a pure roll-up on Ethereum, which is sort of your purest form, design, you could say. And so I think that with Fuel, what we aim to do is, in simple terms, build the absolute best possible roll-up on Ethereum possible using Ethereum DA. We'll also aim to build the best possible layer 2, which wouldn't use Ethereum DA, but would also, could kind of use multiple different DA layers. And there's reasons for that. And then as well, build the best possible layer 1 we also can construct. Because Fuel does have a sequencing layer, which is sort of technically a layer 1, but we don't kind of consider it that way. So really, we want to build sort of the fastest rollup, the fastest layer 2, and the most decentralized layer 1 in history. So for us, that's really the aim. And the idea there is that for the different layers that you have, they cover different use cases. So for Ethereum, it's very much oriented around securing funds, DeFi, and settlement. Whereas if you do a layer 2, I think it's much better for things like AI and gaming. And we've seen a lot of our ecosystem projects push for that kind of thing. So I think that, kind of meeting that demand will be really key. And then lastly, with sequencing and with layer 1s in general, you just want good witnessing and sequencing layers that can allow you to do really expressive rollups. And so all of these things combined kind of give us what I would say is sort of the future of what Fuel will be. And we really hope to sort of dominate in every vertical. So whether it's speed, throughput, decentralization, security, the aim for us is to go for gold and make sure that we can actually achieve all of those with our own architecture in a unique way that actually solves all these problems sort of wholeheartedly.
Okay, I see. About this sequencing layer, that's very interesting. Is that like Move? What Move is doing?
So
yeah.
Yes. So we have our own sequencing system. Right now, it's just doing decentralizing the proposing network. So there will be another phase to decentralize the literal building and the rollups, such that you have like multiple builders in the same place. But first, we're starting with proposers. So we have our own sequencing system for that, and that's currently based on Tendermint, Comma BFT, and Cosmos SDK.
Okay.
But it'll expand out from that to most likely our own architecture, our own variant of Tendermint. And that's mainly because Tendermint's pretty limited in terms of the number of proposers you can have in an efficient way. So we'll be decentralizing that further. The main thing with that is a lot of rollups have become super centralized, you could say, in terms of their building, in terms of their proposing. Yeah. So what we want to do is make sure we have really good sequencing systems so that we can decentralize that process early and just make sure that, as we kind of move towards the future, we don't end up with like a server rollup, but instead end up with things that actually kind of embody these principles of decentralization, you could say. So the sequencing system is very important for that.
Okay, and so that L1 is like the base layer for a lot of L2 that you can build around Fuel? You have a stack open?
Yeah. So basically right now it's pretty limited to build off of for like DA. It's a pretty constrained DA layer at the moment. We do plan to open that up quite a bit. So you could technically build rollups off of it. And I think that we certainly will see that in the future. But I think right now, the more of the main focus is just to decentralize our sequencing for Ignition, which is our Ethereum rollup, and just make sure that we kind of achieve that first. But beyond that, I mean, there's a lot of additional services and things you can actually construct around the sequencing system. And that's where I think it's going to be very useful for stuff like application-specific sequencing, fast bridging, all kinds of different sort of like bonded use cases, you could say. So it's really useful to have it. I still, for me, I'm a pretty big Ethereum maxi. So for me, Ethereum's still the unmatched king of decentralization and layer ones that no one can touch. So I think that building off of Ethereum is very important. But I do think that for a lot of infrastructure projects, having some kind of sequencing or layer one-ish system is very, very important. Yeah.
Okay, and how do you see atomic composability of Fuel? Because you're not in superchain, you don't have this. So how do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think composability and this like idea of atomic composability is a little overrated. I think that we haven't really seen a lot of use cases for it, and other than just like taking a loan and then doing a swap, it's not really that important. I think the bigger pain points we see with Fuel specifically now are just related to bridging, and it's just more or less like ensuring that you can bridge between different layers. So I think that that's really like, the main issue that we see. In terms of like how you could do better atomic composability, I think that as you move closer to reducing finality, and we did propose a finality gadget for this, I think that it solves a lot of the major liquidity issues you can see. And then with solving networks and intents, you can largely solve a lot of the composability issues if you wanted. I think a lot of teams have already worked on that. And as far as like, composability, another thing with Fuel that's interesting is that at the native level, we support sort of all wallets and all Ethereum assets. So for a user, it's not really that different if you're using MetaMask, or if you're using, a Fuel wallet, or if you're using, Cosmos wallet, for example. Like all these different things will be, ready at the native level. So when you have that kind of makes everything for a user pretty easy, and it's largely just a developer issue. So, bridging and finality, and I would say some composability is going to be important, but it's not really, I would say, that important for us right now.
So you don't want like to be a bit like Ag layer or Elastic Chain is like having your L1, a lot of L2 above, like the fuel ecosystem.
Yeah, so you can do a lot of cross-chain,
Yeah.
atomic messaging in the way that Fuel's constructed. It's just a lot of those things sound a lot better than they actually are. So, like, unless everything is a ZK, it's basically already kind of a bit of an annoyance to do this. And the problem with it all being a ZK2 is you'll have a ZK proof that says the entire thing's true. That's great, and you prove that to Ethereum, and you can trust that. But you might not have ZKs ready for what you want to prove are true in a nice way. So this means that, like, the way that you prove truth between chains is pretty awful. And then if you don't have everything in ZK, then you have to deal with finality risk and bonding risk and these other kinds of things. And then that's when you get into kind of like really crazy optimistic design to try to solve this. And I think at the end of the day, there's only a few major players that have all the liquidity that could solve this, because they have liquidity everywhere. And those people are just going to solve things anyway. So when you just give them a good solving system, they can just sort of work it out for a user. And why not? They're on the other end of most of this stuff anyway. So what I would say is like, I'm a little less interested in like cross-chain composability, and I'm a lot more interested in like, let's build new use cases and try to solve all this other stuff first that blockchains haven't even started experimenting with yet, before we get to like crazy communication cases between blockchains. Yeah.
Okay. I think that's a nice transition, because you are optimistic rep right now, I think. Do you see a future with ZK? What timeline? Or
yeah, so Fuel uses like, to do our optimistic rollup, we actually use ZK as well. So we have this kind of what we call like a hybrid proving model, where effectively we we can prove back to Ethereum fault in the chain with ZK. And so that allows us to do a much more simplified proving game that's single round. And so when you have a single round proving game, basically that makes everything so much safer and so much easier to manage. And it's really a simple game. It's just, hey, if the chain's invalid somewhere, produce a ZK proof, submit it to Ethereum, slash the block, move on. And the chain will always progress on a valid branch. So basically, like, if someone produces an invalid block, everything continues as normal on just the next valid block, and that's it. And there's no forking risk or anything like that. So basically, it's a very simple system. It's the same kind of technique we used for Fuel V1, and it just uses ZK in between. Will we go full ZK with like a full ZK rollup? I think it's an option, but I think that a lot of the benefits for choosing a different architecture like Fuel right now is going to be that the optimistic execution is very, very cheap. So, we can do ZK really well because we have a UTXO model, but I would say it's not really a focus for us at the moment. I think that it will be important later, and we can do validium style models where basically so long as you have the UTXOs, the system is valid, and you just allow people, kind of keep their own data, and then that way you don't need to post all the data to Ethereum, and stuff like that's kind of great. Like with a UTXO model, that's perfect, because if you can keep your funds somewhere, like on a hard drive or whatever, then you have them. And otherwise, like, if you lose them, then you lose them. But that kind of validium style plasma cache model will be very possible with Fuel, given our UTXO model. So we're already pretty ahead on that front as well. Yeah.
Like Intmax, right? That's what do Intmax.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably some projects working on something like this. But I think, again, Fuel's pretty uniquely stationed to be able to do it.
Okay. And right now, blobs are saturated. Price goes up for a lot of L2s. So a lot of people are worried that L2s just go AltVM, Celestia again, whatever. What's your point of this? Do you see a world where you go like a validium, or you just want to keep on the blobs?
Yeah, I mean, a validium is definitely an option for us if we really need to, or if blobs became like completely inaccessible. But I would say that Ethereum DA has not been so much of a problem for us, mainly because like we actually apply a lot of really clever compression. So our DA compressor is very, very sophisticated. So basically for us, we're not so concerned about the DA cost right now. I think as fuel throughput picks up, there could very well be some more compression we have to apply just to continue to keep costs down. But for us, like, it's not really impacting user experience. And as well, we also have a unique bonding model that we're experimenting with fuel, the fuel token reward itself, such that some of that can be applied to applications, such that they can be sort of sponsored away, the fees. And this is like in exchange for application assets. So, the idea that users have to pay for every interaction for a system is pretty bad. Like, it's not how most things should work, and like credit systems are pretty awful. So our hope is to kind of keep fees low and then have the applications work out sort of a staking arrangement with stakers and the block builder, such that the users don't have to pay for those fees, and we can focus on bigger problems like liquidity and some of these other things that applications face. So I think like with fuel, we don't want users to pay fees if we're not going beyond a certain amount of usage, basically, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, definitely. I have seen two terms technical. If you can just explain it simply, like fast finality for optimistic, and state rehydratation.
Okay, so two completely separate concepts, but I'll try to explain them as simple as I can. So yeah, with fast finality, the idea there is that when you use these kind of scalability layers, right, like rollups or layer 2s or whatever, at some point the transactions become what we call final, right? They're finally settled, right? So in banking terms, whatever, you could think of it as like final settlement, right? And so there's always a point in time when something becomes like fully settled. And so with layer 2s and rollups, you basically have a different properties of when we consider things settled based upon how those systems are built. And so so with fuel, for example, while the block producer that's building on fuel, the single builder right now is building blocks, when those get signed, it's settled between you and the builder in 1 second. But if you want to wait for when it's finally settled and it's not challengeable and everything's good and done and dusted, then you have to wait 7 days. And that's how Arbitrum and Optimism work as well, in similar fashion. Yeah. So basically, when you're talking about fast finality, you're talking about, okay, what are some ways to improve that time such that the amount of time you have to wait for it to be like proven on Ethereum to be like final is, say, a lot less. And so, one technique, which is, been pretty well understood in the space, is just making everything a ZK rollup. ZK rollups are valid when they're posted to Ethereum, and they're verified and they're valid, right? And that could be a few minutes, a few hours, a day, but it's definitely faster than 7 days. But of course, like ZK is complex and ZK has proving overhead, and it's not necessarily the right choice for everyone in terms of security. So what are some other ways you could get, fast finality from this? So we proposed an interesting gadget to increase finality on Ethereum such that you might not need to wait the 7 days, but still remain an optimistic rollup. And so this technique, is basically along the lines of, with an optimistic rollup, you have this ability for anyone in the world to kind of call bullshit on your rollup and just say, this is invalid, I'm going to prove it to Ethereum and slash these blocks. So the problem with Ethereum is that, like, in order to submit that challenge, you have censorship issues with Ethereum, such that like an attacker could fill up Ethereum with a bunch of garbage and you can't submit your evidence. And so if the window is really small to challenge, then you don't have enough time and things go wrong, basically. So we proposed an interesting mechanism such that, what if you could do something like this, where say you have, say 100 or even more, registered validators that are validating your rollup. But what they do is they kind of have a heartbeat where they're constantly blasting out that things are okay. And if any of those heartbeats stop, then we just assume that there's censorship and we expand the window, which allows people to challenge. But if the heartbeats don't stop, the window can remain very, very small. And then you can submit the challenges if there is need for challenges, and everything progresses as normal. And so by doing this sort of heartbeat mechanism, what's interesting about the technique is that Ethereum can definitely be this system that could censor, like some adversary could censor you on Ethereum in a short window. They just pay for a bunch of garbage or buy the validators off or whatever. But it's very hard to make Ethereum like basically make you do nothing, So when you do nothing, then doing nothing is very hard for an attacker to stop you from doing, which is great. So basically, it's kind of reversing this whole challenge mechanism and saying, hey, everything's good if everyone keeps posting. But if someone doesn't keep posting, then there's clearly a problem. We should expand the window until we figure it out. And so it's a different way to think about fast finality, but this mechanism is one that we're really curious to use and kind of implement, whether it be in like a small sort of ring-fenced amount of funds or in kind of like a larger setting. We want to kind of experiment with this because we think that both for, again, our sequencing system would be perfect for this. It would allow you to kind of move and bridge funds around all these different chains a lot faster, and then you can kind of get faster finality from that. So yeah, it's an interesting mechanism.
Okay, I see. And for I won't say it again. State related. That yeah.
Oh, state rehydration. Yeah. So that technique is like is a lot more. It's a scary name, but it's not that crazy of a technique. And the whole idea there is just that. A lot of these blockchains, they have a big history, right? And they run for a long time. You have, potentially millions of different accounts. And so with blockchains, you kind of have like all the history, right? Every transaction ever made. And then you have sort of the necessary information you need to kind of progress things forward. And that necessary information we kind of call state, right? And the problem with state is that, you have all these nodes kind of running things, but the nodes have to like end up being these kind of huge nodes sometimes, like massive drives. And in order to access that information, you need to have really, really fast drives. So you run into all kinds of problems with basically just what we call like read-write access to hard drives, right? Going back and forth. And so if you're designing a really good blockchain architecture, you want to minimize what we would consider state and just try to shrink that as much as possible or not need it as much. So Fuel does this really well because the UTXO model that we apply for full nodes doesn't require a global state root, this like global state system. It's very light. And then as well, you can use that in certain ways and certain techniques such that you can kind of rehydrate or bring in the data that you need in the moment you're spending things, and then it just can be kind of pruned away after. So in a sense, it can be rehydrated, spent, and then dehydrated and put back into the state. And so in that sense, you kind of get this really nice compression technique. And that allows us to kind of work at scale such that if you had billions of people using the system, it could actually work, because only when they're really changing or spending in the system or moving things around or doing trades, does there need to be more information. Otherwise, it could literally just be everyone summated into a hash on our system, and that's it. And that's a much more scalable system than like storing all your information and my information, everything on this giant node, and having everything on planet Earth work that way, right? It's like very unsustainable. It would never work, basically. So, but if I could say, could we summate every human being on Earth, about 7 billion people, each having their own hash in this system that represents, say, everything that they have, that's more scalable. That'll work. Yeah, that's more the technique that we want to approach. So that's sort of the state rehydration stuff. Yeah.
Okay, very interesting. Very interesting. And yeah, I think a lot of people misunderstand. You know, they think all layer 2 are similar. They don't appreciate stage 1, stage 2, and you're one of the only one that is stage 2. I think there is 3 or 4 maximum, and you were very back in the day. Can you explain what it takes to be a stage 2 and why is it important?
Yeah, so, and to clarify too, so Fuel Ignition, our most recent rollup, which we launched a few months ago, that one is still stage 0. So we're getting it to stage 1 and then to stage 2. But our original rollup we launched in December 2020, Fuel V1, that one is stage 2. And we launched it at stage 2. And so we definitely know what it takes to get to stage 2 because we're one of the only people that did it. And yeah, I mean, in terms of appreciating the sort of properties, I think the main thing there to think about is when you build these kind of roll-up or layered blockchains, right? They use other blockchains underneath the hood, either one or many. And the ideal sort of roll-up or whatever would be that it works so well and it's designed in such a way that it's basically just an extension to Ethereum. It's like the same amount of security as Ethereum, but it's just this like really powerful layer on top. And so that would be what we call like a stage 2 roll up on Ethereum, right? It's like met all the criteria and all this sort of stuff. And it's really nice to see too that like Arbitrum and Optimism and some of these other roll ups are going to probably get to stage 2 soon, hopefully, and basically kind of get there. Because it's been years that they haven't been there yet. But the idea is to fulfill the sort of original idea of roll-ups, which was that roll-ups are this like extension to the core chain, and they just kind of act as this sort of extension. They have pretty much the same security as the base system. And I think that's like the best way to kind of describe stage 2. And then stage 1 is kind of like there's still some training wheels sort of to get there, right? Like you're still in training wheel phase. And then stage 0 is very much like you've just built something and now you're just trying to get it into training wheels so that you can get to stage. So there's kind of different processes to this sort of stage security system. And like layer 2 beat the kind of project that's been maintaining rankings and everything else, I think have been doing a very good job at trying to work with all the different teams and try to define better standards, and also calling people out for when they're not doing the best job they can in terms of security. Because at the end of the day, you don't just want these systems to be like some server somewhere. You want it to be like something that has teeth, right? That like is actually safe beyond just that company. So basically, like I think that's very, very important. Yeah.
Okay, and yeah, very simply, what could happen on a stage 2? What could go wrong?
Yeah. So on a stage 2, what could go wrong? Well, what I would say is that like the ideal case is that if it's an optimistic rollup, that you have at least a few parties or one party validating everything, just protecting the rollup. And in which case, there's not really a lot that can go wrong, because so long as you have one honest party somewhere, it's kind of fine. For other cases where you're at stage 2 and you're a ZK rollup, for example, again, not a lot can go wrong. Of course, bugs, like there's definitely a case where you can have bugs. That's very, very possible, either in the ZK or in the optimistic rollup. And then as well, like outside of bugs, there's really not a lot that can happen. So basically, like you're kind of getting the risk down just to bugs, essentially. In stage 1 and some of these earlier stages, there's a lot that can happen. It's a lot more multi-sigs. There's a lot more ability for hacks and upgrades and other things that are unwanted. So basically, like the earlier stages are pretty loose. But once you get to stage 2, like, someone could try to upgrade it and then not tell anyone, and maybe no one noticed. And then after 30 days, the whole chain is theirs. So you could have something like that happen, but that's pretty rare. So I would say in general, it's probably just like once you've gotten to a stage 2 setting, it's really just about, continuing the validation and then also just bugs, basically. Yeah.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
And is there some dApps that really excite you on Fuel? Where do you see, the best use case for Fuel?
Yeah. So I think for best use cases for us. So again, right now we're pretty niche, as a technology. So it's still people kind of getting to know what it is and kind of how it works.
Mhm.
But the main benefit I would say is that I don't think there's any global clearing system in the world that works as well as Fuel does. So if it's clearing settlement for order books, clearing settlement for points, clearing settlement for pretty much any use case where funds are moving between one and another spot, Fuel is very uniquely positioned to do that. And if you're trying to build a highly scalable application, because we have this sort of UTXO native asset system underneath the hood, we have a really nice system of what we call spending conditions. This is something we get from Bitcoin, and we call those predicates. And these kinds of things are really awesome because they're kind of like a very simple script, and they just sort of say, hey, if anyone can fulfill the conditions on this script, then you can spend this coin. And when you build things that way, it's a lot simpler, it's a lot safer, it's stateless, it's more scalable. It
Mm.
follows that principle of rehydrating the script when you spend and then getting rid of it after. And you can build tremendously sophisticated designs with that. You can build order books, you can build crazy stuff, and it will actually scale and be sustainable over time. It won't be like giant, massive smart contracts that like tracked all this different state over a long period of time. It will literally be a scalable system. So I think that there's a lot of amazing use cases for that, and for things like IP and things like for digital rights and NFTs and anything related to the settlement of assets globally. I think Fuel is going to be uniquely designed for. And it's because blockchains are built for that. They are really built for tokens, settlement, and assets. And like that's the core use case, right? And so
Mm.
I would say, for us, the big focus would be that. But high performance order books with no smart contracts, pretty scalable, sounds pretty good. Global, point systems that like any person on planet Earth could access and trade, over a period of time. That's something we can definitely handle. So when it comes to scale, when it comes to throughput and sustainability, there's no architecture that can compete with Fuel currently right now.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I think L2Bit categorize Fuel as a like payment rollup, something like this.
That was the original, yeah. So Fuel
Ah,
V1 followed that principle because Fuel V1 was sort of our first attempt, and that used UTXO's native assets. It was parallel processable, but it was focused on payments, and then we could do atomic swaps as well. So it's a very basic system. So that's why that very first Fuel V1 was stationed as that. But Fuel Ignition, right, our more recent rollup, that has the Fuel VM, the Sway language, so you can be much more expressive and build all these different kinds of apps with it.
Okay, I think in layer 2 there is half part of technology, which is Fuel is amazing, and there is half part of communication, building a community, because it's still fragmented. So Base have done a really good job at this. How do you see this in Fuel?
Yeah. So I think that like Fuel's definitely struggled a lot in the past with these areas. We're much more builders than we are people who necessarily build communities or do marketing or things like that. We're actually pretty bad at those things. With the recent launch of Fuel and the Fuel asset itself, we tried to start the process of sort of building up what will be our community. And, we have obviously lots of people on Discord. We have obviously lots of people following us, etc. But it's still pretty small and niche in terms of the ecosystem and the builder group. I think Fuel's best shot at solving those things will come from the fact that while we might not have the best marketing or the biggest community or the biggest ecosystem yet, what we will show people is that I think we're some of the best builders, and I think builders attract builders, even despite, say, growth numbers or things like that. And I think that we want to showcase sort of the power of what Fuel can do, such that builders who aren't necessarily like so obsessed with, say, just like getting liquidity in their app or like just basic users or whatever, will want to actually take a shot with us and kind of use the tech in the best way possible. I think if you want liquidity and you want something else, or maybe some users, maybe you'd go to Base. If you want DeFi, you go to Arbitrum. Like, I think there's already places for certain builders that if they want to do that, they can. But if you want to build something different with a new system, with different paradigms, different ways to construct everything, a completely different architecture, a completely different approach, right? to how things work, and you want to build something special in that way, then you should come to Fuel. You know, and I think that's where we can actually maximize what Fuel brings to the table. You know, because I think it's going to be that, and basically honesty will get us as far as we can. And I think, you know, for a lot of the ecosystem, builders who know and builders who develop know what Fuel is, and you know, they definitely. I think there's definitely a lot of respect there. But I think for normal people and users yet, I think there's a lot of work to do to actually build up, you know, that presence and kind of get the word out about what Fuel is, what we do, like why we did all these things. And I think that's where, you know, we have a lot of room to grow, basically.
Yeah. Okay, I understand. And yeah, you have so a token named Fuel. It has a lot of more utilities than most of the layer 2. What's the role of Fuel in the ecosystem?
Yeah, so I think one of the most powerful kind of systems you have with blockchain is the ability to have a token or create a token. And I think whether that's for application level cases or infrastructure level cases, your tokens are super powerful. And I think when applied in the right settings can be really useful. So with Fuel, the main idea there is that, well, first of all, we want to decentralize sequencing and decentralize building, these kinds of things. And to do that, you need a crypto economic system underneath the hood that involves a token to do things like staking and delegated staking and so forth. And so it really underpins that initial system as a kind of first starter in terms of what it does. So it underpins that. And then beyond that, we kind of find staking, while it's interesting, it's very important, kind of boring, you know? And like, if you're just honest, it's just sort of like, you know, you pick your, if you're delegating, you pick your validator because you trust them, or a set of validators, and you delegate, and you know, that's it, right? It's not really enough, right? And so we wanted to go a little further with that and say, well, you know, what if people wanted to take a bit of their reward from staking and do something more powerful with it, right? To really supercharge the ecosystem, kind of get things moving. And so the idea behind our kind of bonding mechanism is such that you could take a bit of those rewards and you can bond them to specific apps. And when you bond them to specific apps, you're kind of in a sense, you're taking your reward. That app is going to incentivize some of that reward with, say, points, or say with their own token. And in the process, you're actually alleviating at a base level gas fees for users. So you're improving the app, you're getting, you know, their assets back, right? And then as well, this process can even be more efficient because the builder can actually play a role in between it. So the first step, which we showed in our just kind of bonding demo, is just sort of taking some of these rewards and making them more useful for the whole ecosystem, right? And in exchange, you get assets back from the app. But beyond that, the builder can actually play a role in it, and such that you can bond to specific apps, and then the builder can just say, hey, you know what? I see these apps have a lot of bonding. I'll just be the builder. I'll take some of those rewards. I'll pay for their gas fees. So the users don't have to pay anything. And then basically, you know, the app will still run a bit of Sybil resistance, you know, maybe a CAPTCHA here and there, something like that. And it's just now the app and the builder taking care of that stuff. And the system will work sort of underneath the hood to allocate resources. Because when you think about a blockchain right now, you're charging these fees, but why are we charging fees? The fees are very small. There's not really a lot of money to be made. Even if we were doing high TPS, the fees are not that great unless you're like a top 5 blockchain, right? And even if you're a top 5 blockchain, charging fees is kind of a bad model in general, right? So how can we move beyond that? Well, instead of charging fees, which are just sort of spam resistance effectively, you know, what if the apps could run their own spam resistance in their own way, right? And then now, because there's no need for the spam resistance, the block builder can just say, hey, why don't I just work it out with these bonders, stakers, and the app, whatever the resources are going to be coming to me for that. And it's kind of like a VE model, but for the block resources itself. And that changes the whole dynamic of how chain resources are managed for a chain. And I think that that's like a super crazy model, because it gets rid of fees for users. It makes base usage work, but it also allocates chain resources in a completely different way from how other people do it. And this opens up a lot of new doors, because
Mm-mm.
You know, it's kind of like blockchains are broken not just because of the UX, but because I don't want to pay a fee every time I have to use an app. Like if I just want to use it, I don't have to pay a fee for that. Like it's kind of stupid. Like when I go on Slack or whatever, I don't pay a fee to AWS behind the scenes every time I use it. Like that's kind of silly, right? You would run subscription models, you would run something else. So why would blockchains be any different, right? And I think the only reason why this hasn't been tried is quite frankly because most people in blockchain don't try anything new at all. And so for us,
Yeah.
like
Mm.
you can think about Fuel as just like we are not afraid to try some new things. Like I think we showed that every single time, and we'll continue to show that. And I think it will yield the most interesting results for what Fuel is as a project for the whole community. And I think that at a base level, that's important. But also, I do think that as Fuel finds its footing, you know, this will be the primary strategy that we take, which is to ensure that we actually progress the space forward with new primitives and new ways of thinking of things. Even if they don't work, we'll just give it a try because why not? Like everyone else is just copying each other. So like who the hell cares? Like why don't we actually progress the space and try a different model, right? So it's very much in our kind of ethos as builders to do this basically.
No, I think it's really a great idea. It look a bit like what does BitTensor with subnet allocating, you know, staking and everything. But do you think that could bring some competition to these dApps?
I think so. I mean, like, I think in terms of competition, well, first of all, better user experience is amazing, right? Whether it's for fees or it could be as well for
Yeah.
attracting liquidity or new markets, right? If you're a new app and you have a token, you know, typically you don't want to launch the token until you have enough community, you have enough people, you have enough support, and you have enough utility, right? But what if at the very early stages, a project could launch a token and just give a bit of those resources out to pay the bills of the chain, right? It's a special kind of case. It's a starting point, right? And it creates a new market for that specific token in an asset that people are familiar with. That's actually a super powerful primitive at the base level. Will it create competition between apps? Yes. The VE style model is all about bribing everybody to get your resources over with other kinds of incentives, right? And I think that chain resources are no different than liquidity resources in a DEX. So they work very, very similar. So basically, there's no reason why a chain can't work the same way. And the builders are now the ones kind of picking, like, hey, I'll give this section for free and this one for not. And you know, eventually you can kind of build that into the protocol. But right now, just keeping it at the app level is actually really nice because we can experiment more. And then as we find the right patterns, they can be built further into the protocol later, into the builder level. But again, it also eliminates all this additional accounting because instead of the fees now having to be taken care of by users, fees can be taken care of by other actors eventually once builders take over the process. And then all this like fee accounting that needs to be done doesn't need to be done anymore. And even that's a huge win, right? Because it's just think about how many accounting measures you have to take just to account for gas fees for every transaction. It's like an enormous amount of stuff. Whereas if the builder could just accept things, like that would be a much better model, right?
Yeah. Just to play a bit devil advocate, does that could look like a bit what happened with liquidity mining back in the day? You know, like some dApps giving too much to bring some user, and later on the asset crash.
Of course, I think like everything needs to be calibrated well. I think liquidity mining in general, I think it works, but it only works as long as you do it. And then otherwise, you got to have some really good reasons for why people should be there, right? I think the problem with the current space is that everyone's so mercenary oriented and doesn't have any long-term perspectives on things that basically like everything's sort of pay to play in that setting. And that makes experimentation really difficult because if you're building new primitives or new kinds of things, like outside of running liquidity mining programs is pretty difficult. And there's all kinds of other chains and they'll all sell you everything. You know, they'll say, we have the biggest community, we have the biggest growth, we have the biggest whatever. They don't really. They have millions of farmers that are ready to farm everything. They're not real people. Real people are out in the world right now and they don't know anything about blockchain other than like maybe they hold Bitcoin or something, right? And they've heard about it. So unfortunately, the real space, I think, is still evolving, and I think real users are not here yet. I think that that's a long way away. But I do think it's coming, and I think that we need to be ready for as it comes, because as AI takes over more of our lives, we'll have to invent new markets for humans to play in, and those markets will need the foundations of blockchain to succeed, basically, in fairness and in a system. And so, as we stop doing, plumbing and fixing buildings and stuff, and that all gets taken care of by like robots, then you and I have to like join Grand Theft Auto 6 and like start working in that economy, because that's like actual humans doing things, right? So the world will rapidly shift, and you'll need these kinds of asset systems to make it all function, right? So yeah, tokens are going to be very important in that.
Yeah. Definitely. What's the roadmap of Fuel for 2025?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm kind of giving you a bit of the alpha right now, because we're supposed to release some of this detail over this live stream. But I'd say the roadmap is, I mean, first of all, the stuff we've talked about, which is obviously trying to get to stage 1 and then stage 2. So security is important. We want to continue to decentralize our proposing network. So to go from, say, 12 validators up to 100, and then from 100, we want to get to 10,000. And we have a plan to do that. It will require using a different architecture. I don't think Tendermint will be the best one to get to 10,000, but we'll apply that, and that's very important for security. But beyond that, we're seeing a lot of pressure and use cases for people that want to go really fast with Fuel. So right now we have DeFi and use cases that are being settled on Ignition, that are settled on Ethereum, but Ethereum's pretty constrained. So I think that we want to open up a new layer for both experimentation, for AI, for gaming, that basically will act as a sort of super layer for Fuel, and that super layer will be pretty wild. So I don't want to give you any numbers, but high numbers in terms of in terms of speed and throughput, very high numbers. So basically, that's what I would say there, and I think the goal of that will be a fewfold, right? I mean, one is that we do need to get the word out about Fuel. Nothing does that better than high numbers. But as well, we do need to solve for some of these use cases where, like, I think people want to experiment with a lot larger chains than what Ignition is. And so, for our ecosystem, for some of our gaming projects and stuff like that, I think that there's a lot of real use case there. And so you'll see a lot of that. And then there's all this other stuff we need to improve, right? The block explorer for Fuel is like pretty incomprehensible right now. So, some fixes are rolling out for that kind of thing. We'll continue to demystify the wallet, the block explorers, all that kind of stuff. Name systems, quality of life things, I think for the chain will be really important. Fixing some of the ecosystem up. I think we have a great ecosystem. It's just a lot of them are not great at, it's the same thing as Fuel, not great at marketing or branding. So I think we need to fix that up. And then I think we need to kind of get the word out more about what Fuel is. So these are all going to be things that, we work on this year, but I think it's going to be a pretty crazy year for the project for sure.
Amazing. That's exciting. Okay, I just have 2 more questions. First, is there a subject I didn't cover already you want to talk about?
Oh, okay. Yeah, let me see. I think one subject that kind of gets missed, but that I think is important, is like, you see a lot of chains throwing out some big numbers, but no one tells you like the reality of those numbers. They'll throw out some big numbers and say like 10,000 TPS, but it's like, under what conditions, right? And so it's like, is it 10,000 TPS with 100 validators, with 10, with 1, right? And if it's a roll up, can I run the chain? Can I validate it myself? Like, is it really validatable, right? And then as well, like, there's a lot of people that say, oh, I have this layer 2 on Ethereum, but the DA is not on Ethereum. So it's like, how much of Ethereum is that? Because like, there's bridges to Solana. Like, is Solana on Ethereum? You know what I mean? Like, it's the same kind of question, right? You could even fault proof Solana probably on Ethereum too. So is Solana a layer 2, right? And I think that something you see in the space is like, people are quick to throw out big numbers, but they never really justify the security of those numbers. Like, I can write you a server right now that can do, 1 million TPS over like an order book on a single server, no problem. Like, that's never been an issue, right? It's just a large computer and a server. I could write it in Java, and I hate Java, and I could write it in Java. It would still work, right? So like, you know, when you ask yourself this, you're like, okay, so really when we talk about big numbers, what do we really mean and under what constraints, right? And I think that I think I see a lot of rollups that are, or layer twos that are on Ethereum. I won't mention any names because I do like both teams. I like the people, I like who they are, I learn from them. But I would just say that like there isn't enough accountability in the space for like actually on Ethereum versus like related to Ethereum, right? And I think this is like a problem of sort of layer twos and rollups in general. But like, you know, if you see a team saying we get a lot of high throughput, then you need to, the next question you should ask is it on Ethereum DA or not? Because if the answer is it's not on Ethereum DA, then basically like, well, that could mean a lot of things. It's like, it could mean a wide variety of things for security, right? So I'd say that like, that's probably one thing, you know, we didn't cover that. I think like, you know, Fuel is always trying to post to Ethereum for ignition. For this other layer two, we won't, but we won't market it as on Ethereum. So we certainly won't do that. You know, I think we don't want to do that because it's not true, you know, at least to us, it's not really true. So it's bridged and provable on Ethereum, but so is like anything in the world, you know? So,
Yeah.
you know, so it's like, is that really the case that we should say that? So probably not. But will it go really, really fast? Yes. Yes, it will. Will it do crazy numbers? Yes, it will. So like, you know, I think someone's got to call that out at some point, basically. Yeah.
And isn't using megagas is enough, or you can cheat even with that?
Sorry, using what? I missed that.
Megagas. You know, like base those.
So that helps with the problem of like TPS, right? Which is like kind of a nebulous number because it's like TPS over what? You know, it's like TPS over transfers, over swaps, over deploying contracts, right? So the mega gas number is kind of useful, but it's also not because, for example, our gas system works very differently from the EVM. Like it charges differently for different things. So like, why would our gas system necessarily be equivalent to a different gas system? And that's the same with like Starknet or some of these other rollups. Like basically, why would there be equivalence there? So I don't know if mega gas is useful either. I think what you could do, which I'm starting to see more of, which I like, which is to say, well, how many transfers can you do, or how many swaps can you do? Like in theory, you know, it's like an actual action, right? That's like definable, right? And then you kind of do the throughput over that, and that's maybe like a more useful, you know, metric of TPS. But unfortunately, for most of the planet, all they understand is just big number and TPS, and they don't want to use mega gas. They want to use TPS. You know, they want to do transfers per second, and like so in that sense, unfortunately, like we're fighting an uphill battle. We forever didn't post TPS numbers because we thought we were above them, and now we're just like fuck it, no one, no one, like just tell them the fucking TPS numbers. Like they're very high. You know, like why are we underselling ourselves? So yeah.
Okay, I understand. And yeah, last question is not about Fuel. It's just you're a builder for many years, I guess. So maybe you have some good advice for, I don't know, just a young investor or just someone that want to learn about crypto?
Yeah. I mean, I think my early advice is that, I mean, I've seen a lot of people, so I've seen a lot of non-devs, obviously like get pretty slammed by what crypto is, like whether it's knowledge overload or whether it's just like being dumb, you know, and like, you know, buying a crazy amount of meme coins or something, right? Like there's a lot of ways to be dumb in crypto. So I think, you know, I think you have to look at projects and look at cases for things in a way that you can kind of get a good sense of what the project is, like who the team is, or what the nature of it is, and that sort of thing, in order to make the best decisions possible as to like what you want to spend your time with and your resources with, right? So I think for a non-dev, it would just be like, be very careful, and if anything, like ETH and Bitcoin are your friend, you know, and that's it. Like don't go beyond that, you know. And when it comes to you know, when it comes to everything else, what I would say is that like for a dev, there's a few different ways this can all go, right? One is that you have a few years left until AI development kind of takes over most things, and then it's really the process of development completely changes. And I think initially it'll be additive, and then it will be non-additive, and then, you know, a lot of these things that we can do with chains will just be done by AI. So I think you have to adapt to that world, because most things will be machine learning oriented. So whatever you do, you probably have to factor that into your calculus. The second thing is, if you do something really genuinely original, most of the time no one will support you. So like basically, if you want to actually do something that's really different, that's like really first principles, you will basically get no support. And it's very, very hard to find support for that kind of thing. Fuel's very fortunate that we were able to find support, but a lot of the time people just will not support you, whether it's just normal people, whether it's like, VCs, whatever. They're not really good at actually taking risk. What they really want is things that they know have sort of succeeded, and then they want to support that. They don't really want to do new things. New things are really painful and really, really tough. Fuel has picked the most painful, awful, embarrassing, worst case road pretty much every time. It's mainly because, though, I think it's the only way to push the space, and it's the only way to do do blockchain justice by actually experimenting and trying things. And again, very few people will do this because most people are risk averse. So I think that like, if you really want to progress the space, it's going to be pretty painful. If you just want to do what other people have done successfully and not progress the space, you'll probably find a lot more support than you think. And the support will be initially great. And then I think I see a lot of projects that, because they basically did what everyone else did and they copy and pasted, they are most likely to fail, because they have no real moat, no real unique system. And eventually everyone figures that out, right? Whereas like, I think if you actually do things in a unique way and you do things in a way that's different, it can be really painful, and everyone thinks it's not going to work and everyone calls you out. But eventually you find your footing and you find your people and you find your support. And then after, if you can really succeed with that, then I think everyone will question why they doubted it in the first place, because it was done from first principle thinking. And I think that like, it depends on what path you want to take in, any kind of ecosystem, whether it's blockchain or anything else. But I think pretty much in life, if you want to do something different, the world will give you a ton of pain. It's easy to give you a ton of pain. But basically, if you're ready for that and you want to do that and you think that that's important, then do it, because I think at the end of the day, it's worth it. It's just super painful.
Yeah, that's the way. Just one question, last question, because you talk a lot about AI. Maybe you believe in FOOM or agent AI. What's your point of view about what's happening right now in the blockchain?
Yeah, I mean, like, we just recently released an AI agent kit to build agents on Fuel.
Really?
And
Nice.
I think my view on AI initially, and on these agent kits and kind of what's happening. Initially, my view on AI was like, I was pretty concerned. I mean, I'm a philosophy dropout, so like, I think about how bad things can get a lot, and it's like not particularly happy with AI as like a whole thing of how it was progressing, and also how it was taking over blockchain. I think my view has changed a little bit. Like, I kind of, you can see my tweets to Ilya from Near, who, is like an AI guy, right? And I messaged him about like, are you kind of concerned about the existential threat of AI to like humans and like our purpose, right? And he kind of said something that changed my mind about AI recently, which was really great, which is that I think AI is actually just going to move us back to what we all know is coming, which is that we can build a machine to do anything we can do. So all the things we don't want to do, like that we don't like, we probably don't do. But that's not going to remove our need to compete with each other. That's not going to remove our need to have status over each other. Like, human beings are wired this way. Like, it's all about status games. It's all about that kind of stuff. So I think in an ideal world, kind of the jobs or the purposes or roles we have in society, they kind of get moved away to AI. But we kind of move into a different world where, like, if I just want to run a goat farm, I can just do that. Or if I want to live in a virtual reality and kind of, work in that reality that's more interesting, I can do that. And the status games and everything still remain. And nothing really changes that much for humans. I think most men right now are probably playing video games all day. And that's because, like, again, they're just kind of wired to like compete. They're wired to have status. They're wired to, find the next win, right? And like I see that over and over again. And so, when you see that kind of thing happen, I think that like a lot of things change, but then a lot of things don't. And when it comes to AI and blockchain, I think we're just seeing the very early stages of experimentation. So it's really dumb stuff, which is great.
Yeah.
Everything always starts dumb, like, and then it kind of gets more interesting. So I think the agent stuff, will release a lot more stuff, a lot more experimentation with Fuel and AI. And I think the space with AI is evolving really rapidly. Like Fuel's meme coin platform, like Fuel Up, they're going to make everything agent based. It's not that hard to do. Like it's a fun thing to do. But I would say that like, on the tech side, I think we're just starting to see it. I think it will make blockchain way more accessible, way more accessible, because so much of blockchain would be so much easier if I could just go transfer 100 USDC to this and it was done.
Yeah.
Like I
Definitely.
want to type in numbers and copy addresses or whatever. I don't want to do any of that, right?
Yeah.
So basically, like, I think like next week you'll see a bunch of stuff from Fuel. Hopefully next week, we'll do this. But like beyond that, I think there's going to be a lot more stuff coming. So it's like, doing really sophisticated stuff. We have an agent that's like on all day monitoring things and like doing trades and swaps and stuff. Like all that'll be possible. And then blockchains no longer need to have all these silly user interfaces for each app, because it's more just like, hey, I want to lend this much from Aave or this much from Swayland in our case, right? And you just do it and it's done. Like stop all this, like, clicking a user interface and all this kind of stuff. It's like, it's all kind of silly, right? And I have to learn new user interfaces every time. So with Fuel, we'll be breaking everything down to actions, and you can launch dApps and things and not need to build a user interface for it, because it'll just be an action that's registered. And I think that's a better way to use blockchains, quite frankly. Like, who cares about all this other stuff? Like, branding of some decks that you've seen 5 million times. Like, do you really, really care about that? It's like, probably not, So, so I think that this is like the more exciting stuff I see, which is just making this more accessible. And then beyond that, I think like, I think AI and blockchain is just going to get more and more interesting. Like, I think it's just going to evolve into its own kind of thing. And I think you'll start to see governance done with AI through like TEEs, and you'll start to see like a bunch of different kind of problems get solved there. And then I think people have to really change the way they think about these systems, because they are settlement systems. AI will need them to settle between different AIs that they don't trust. Settlement and asset movements are very, very needed. But beyond that, humans will take up a very little amount of space on blockchains. It'll be mostly AI, I think, and mostly games and AI, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, that's perfect. Thank you a lot for this interview. It was really, really interesting.
Awesome, great. Yeah, thanks for having me, and yeah, it was a pleasure.
Okay, awesome. Well, have a great day, and maybe we'll see each other somewhere. And
yes,
have a good time, man.
Thanks so much.
See you.